Okay. Just so all of you know, we are going to record this just to have, and we probably will post this on our website later in the next few weeks. I think we have almost everybody, so I'm just going to start off, and then Dr. Ristigata, we're going to let you speak for a few minutes, and then Dr. Yannick, and then we'll start with the presentation. So I just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of the day, like your days, to be on this call today. You know, Robert and I thought this was going to be very different, but we're going to make the best of it, and we appreciate all the hard work. So we want to thank the faculty board first, just for the constant support throughout the last few months, really almost a year. So we appreciate you guys being here today and over the last year. And then Cindy, that includes you, so thank you for all your help. The editors, we know you did this out of the joy of your heart, and I know it was extra time with this crazy year, so we appreciate everything you guys have done for the journal. And then obviously our authors, you guys have done a wonderful job. I know we asked a lot out of you, and you guys produced. We're very proud of what we have today. So, and then Robert, thanks for being my partner in crime through all of this and being the support system. So I think Robert's going to have some words at the end. He'll close this out for us. So Dr. Ristigata, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. This has been such an exciting group of people. Danielle and Robert in particular have put tremendous amount of work into this journal, and I so appreciate it. It's such a joy to work with both of you. A little bit of background on the journal. So the journal started in 2008. It was, the original idea came from a student, a PhD student at the time, Karen Wolf, who was an attorney, and he said, you know, in law school we had a student journal, and it really helped us with getting published. And so we thought it would be a fabulous idea and a great opportunity for our students to get some publication experience in, and to get some experience with running a professional journal like this one. Since then, we've had new leadership for the journal every year, including new student editorial boards. Some of the original faculty that was on the board at the time, the editorial board, have remained consistent, which I appreciate. I know that it takes a lot of time to review, so I do appreciate the work that they have done. Over all the years, and this is 2008, so now we're on our 12th year, right? I have never seen a more dedicated and committed group of leaders. As the leadership of this current board, the changes that have been implemented, and you will hear about some of these, will have a long-term effect on the journal. And I think the professionalism of the journal has been elevated. This includes a name change from New Visions in Public Affairs to the new name of the journal, which is the Biden School Journal of Public Policy, and a much larger faculty advisory board than we had in the past. What this does is it gives us the opportunity as a faculty to really provide some subject matter expertise, which we were not able to do with a small board before. I think your increase in the board has really helped us with that. Much of the credit goes to Danielle Littman and Robert Damoloria for their tireless leadership, not only of the journal, but also of the board. The students who served on the editorial board have done particularly a good job this year. They spend a great deal of time working with the submitters to make sure the editing occurred before it went to the faculty board. And these students are Momar Talassis, Rebecca Cox, Eileen Young, Pepper Chesser, Simone Atkins, and Pravesh Raghu. In the faculty board, that in increasing the size, as I said before, allowed us to have more diverse expertise. Some of these board members were the original board members, others have been added. And these are Jonathan Justice, Leland Ware, John McNutt, Danilo Yannick, Jane Case Lilly, Dan Bottomley, and Lawrence Abegamisi. And I've been on the board myself over the years. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Cindy Braun for providing administrative support to the journal. I congratulate all of you and the authors of these very timely articles. The production of the journal, as you know, takes a tremendous amount of work, and all of us are volunteering for this activity. So I know it's your precious time that we're taking to do this work. I encourage any student that is online right now with us to consider submitting to the journal and to also consider being otherwise involved. I think many of your classmates can tell you that this is a really good experience and one that will serve you well in the future. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Segeda. We appreciate your help with everything throughout this process. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Yannick.
Yes, thank you, Danielle. Danielle asked me to talk a little bit about the research process and what it might mean in doing the journal. But first, I want to echo Maria's comments about Daniel and Robert and the editors and the students who submitted and the students today who are presenting. It really represents, as Maria said, a real change, a real increase in the kind of work that the journal does. So congratulations to you all. Danielle and Robert really worked hard over the course of the years and had to make some decisions about how to present this and how to carry it out, and now how to do it in terms of the presentations themselves. I guess I was thinking this morning about how this fits into what we're doing, and I was thinking that this is for many the beginning of an academic and research life, and there is something about the conceptualizing of ideas, the carrying out the research, to writing it down, to submitting it for review, that is both scary, I think humbling, but the other side of that is invigorating. I don't know where to look up here. I got to find it here for you so you all see. And that's invigorating. It's the give and take of scholarly argument. It's based on the evidence, challenged on the evidence, and resolved on the evidence. And that's what we do in the school. That's what we do in public policy and the the administration world. The world where Sarah Bruck made a very good point a couple of days ago, where public policy and administration is the dependent variable sometimes, when our research is directed at changing or at least informing that approach to public and social affairs. And it's also the independent variable in many instances where we're trying to find out, to learn the effects of one public policy or administrative practice versus another. So where I see the journal, and I mean the experience of the journal, both from the writing, the submitting to editing, to rewriting, organizing it and presenting it, is all, it seems to me, a critical step in joining the enterprise that I just spoke about, meaning that academic and research set of activities that's based on the evidence. I think the journal done well, as you have done it, is that step where we are willing then to engage our ideas and to engage them and engage others' ideas in the sure knowledge that the give and take of our views of any of these things, public policy or administration, is based on the evidence, and how it is we gather the evidence, how it is we communicate the evidence, and how it is we have an effect on the social world around us. So congratulations to you all. I was pleased to be the small part of it. I'm looking forward to the presentations now. Take care.
Thank you. Logan, I know it's a bit earlier than we planned, but you're more than welcome to start. And we planned for, I think I said a 15-minute presentation and then, some time for Q&A before the next one. So if you want to share your screen, if you have a PowerPoint, I'm going to leave it to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see it? Yeah, okay. I can't see very many faces. Okay. So I am Logan Gerber Chavez, and I'm a second-year PhD student in the Disaster Science and Management program. And my paper in the journal is called Effective Disasters, the 2013 European Flood Damage as a Policy Driver. So to give a little bit of background on this project, I had been learning about policy windows and disasters as focusing events, and I was interested in disasters as a driver in policy learning. But most of the examples in the literature are all about events in the United States. For example, the most foundational work is by Thomas Birkeland, and he talks about the Northridge earthquake and changing building codes and 9/11, and we're all familiar with the differences in the aviation safety policy, but also the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security. And he talks about these big events like Hurricane Katrina and Exxon Valdez. And I wanted to know if the same results came in other government structures and if that same principle held internationally, which is why I started doing this study. So my research question was, when a disaster impacts multiple countries at the same time, do they react with policy implementation in the same way? And my hypothesis was based on Birkeland's work that he found that the more severe disasters elicited more policy change. So I'm using that idea that more damage should equal more policy change. And I wanted to structure the study as a natural experiment to find a disaster to be able to look at the effect of it. So I tried to find a disaster that was a fairly large event and would have affected multiple countries. Was pretty recent, but not too recent, so you'd be able to see policy change actually happen. So the event I chose was the 2013 European floods. And I chose this because it was in the top 10 economic damage disasters for floods since 1900. And you can see it was a pretty substantial event from some of the pictures there. It affected 9 countries that are listed there also. So with the variety of areas and how big the impact region was, I thought it was a good experiment subject. So a little bit about this flood. It was an event that was several weeks in the summer from May to June of 2013, and it affected several river basins, which are also listed there. And some of these areas were getting 2 months of rain in 2 days, and this was already their rainy season. And like I said, you can see these pictures are from Austria and Germany, but there are a lot more pictures that you'll see later on from other places. There were different levels of damage and different impacts for every country. And so one bit that was important to me when I first started looking at this was trying to figure out how to compare the damage between countries. So at first look, when I was trying to evaluate the damage and compare them, it was almost like comparing apples to oranges with how different the countries were and the impacted areas were, with different income levels and different population densities. And some areas were farmland and some were capital cities like Prague and Budapest and Vienna. So it was very hard to look at any one indicator that we would normally use for disaster damage. But you couldn't even talk about flood magnitude, because for some areas, like if it was a 30-year flood, for some it was a 1,000-year flood. In one town in Germany, it was their biggest flood since 1501. So it was like pretty big differences. So all of the normal damage indicators seemed like they would be a biased measure of what actually happened when you go from country to country. So I went looking for a measure that would minimize that bias as I compared the event. So I found a measure that was developed for the World Health Organization in 2015 by a scholar in New Zealand named Dr. Noy, and it's called life years. So life years is a measure that takes normal disaster damage indicators and translates them into time lost. So I'm going to explain that a little bit right now so that you understand my methods a little bit more. So like I said before, the premise of life years is to measure things in time. And I know that's kind of a foreign concept, so I'll give an example of why that's useful. If you think about what $1 is worth in the world, it's going to be very different depending on what country you're in for how much that dollar actually gets you. But ethically, a human life should mean the same no matter what country you're in. So Dr. Noy was using public health indicators for disability coefficients and quality of life coefficients for measuring these impacts in terms of human time. So if you think about how old somebody is when they die in a disaster, and you know their life expectancy, then you know that that many years was lost, and that there's a different impact on society when a child dies versus when an adult dies. And it's the same principle with if you're injured. So if you had to spend a week in the hospital, then you lost a week of time, so 1/52nd of a life year in that way. So like I said, this is just a side note to explain what I was doing, and I get a lot of questions about this. So if you have questions at the end about the details, I can answer them at the end. But to explain how that fits into my methods, I collected disaster damage data, and there's no one authority on disaster damage. So I ended up gathering all the reports of this flood that I could find from international sources, from nonprofits, from disaster databases, or from the individual countries that were reporting their damage. So I ended up having 4 to 10 sources depending on the country, and they were all a little bit different numbers. So I ended up averaging out those numbers to get the indicator for each country, which I'll show you in a table on the next slide. Then I took policy records and press statements and applications to the EU and UN for aid, so that they were not only talking about their policy changes, but also attributing them to a certain event. So I took those reports and did calculations to convert them all into life years, and then compared that damage across the study area and looked at how that affected the policy. So this is an example. Well, this is my table of how the data came out. This table shows all the indicators collected, and they're averaged by the source, which if you look at the fatalities one, that's how they're like 0.5 or 0.75. It's because it's averaged across the different sources. So don't be confused about that bit. But if you look at the life years for total damage, you can see how that bias would have come out if we had used just one of the other indicators. So like for Germany here, for economic damage, like it's by far the highest. But if you look at the amount of people that were affected by the disaster in the Czech Republic, more people died, more people were made homeless, more people were affected by the disaster. So you can see that translates out in life years and shows what impact would be on society for the people lost versus just the infrastructure damaged, or like having infrastructure that's worth more. So this equation here shows an example calculation for Austria, just to show how the numbers are plugged into the equation with the disability coefficients and the quality of life coefficients for different things. So you can kind of see how those numbers are plugged in the different places. So this is the results of that one column of life years shown graphically and geographically. So in the graphical representation, you can see it's on a logarithmic scale, so that you can actually see them all, because it goes from 500,000 to just 2. So it's very difficult to see if it wasn't on a logarithmic scale. Geographically, you can see how large the comparison area is. So those are the 9 countries, and this is my evaluation of the damage. The darker the color, the worse the impact is. So then when we go to the results, from that you can see a very condensed summary of the policy changes I was able to find. And it showed that my hypothesis was supported, in that countries with the most damage were the ones that were implementing disaster policy changes, and specifically were able to attribute them to this particular event. So whether that was in, press statement, in their national plan, or an after action report to the EU, or evaluating their disaster risk reduction, they were able to point to this event specifically as a reason for why they made the policy change. So to go through those results a little bit, the Czech Republic had the most damage here, but I actually wasn't able to include that in the final conclusion because they had a change of government in 2014. So it's hard to differentiate if policy changes were because of a flood or because the whole government changed. But for the next highest, Germany and Hungary, they both made national policy changes to their flood and disaster risk policy. And Germany actually ended up making an international agreement with Austria on their joint risk area, since the border between them is where it was flooded the most. Austria had a little bit less damage, but they did have national policy change. That policy change, though, was procedural rather than like an actual substantive change. So it kind of shows like a degree in change based on the damage. For Romania, that was another one that I couldn't get enough policy data in English, so that one wasn't included either. But for the countries at the bottom, for Bulgaria and Croatia and Serbia, which were the lowest damage indicators, there were no policy changes from the flood. And an interesting point on that is that for Serbia and Croatia, with the 2 very lowest damage here, when I was going through their policy, they did have some pretty big policy changes to their flood policy, but they specifically attributed it to the 2014 floods instead of 2013. So when I was trying to look back, like trying to compile everything, I did some like back of the envelope calculations for their damage for the year after floods in 2014, and found that it was about 15,000 life years, which is about the same level as Hungary up here. So it gives more strength to the conclusion that in a time where they weren't damaged as much, they didn't make the policy changes, but when they were faced with a flood that would put them up there at the same level as these high-ranking ones, they made policy changes and attributed them to that event, which was kind of an interesting side finding. So in conclusion, this shows that there is a relationship between disaster magnitude and policy change in an international context, and not just in the US. For another interesting piece, it shows that disasters can be considered as political actors in some circumstances, that they have that potential to push these policies through in that policy windows framework, even though there's added complexity for international diplomacy. We saw 2 different international agreements that came from this. And they were also able to overcome any national pressures that would be conflicting in a normal policy discussion. So it shows the principle that Thomas Birkeland introduced, that if we have policies ready to be implemented, then we can push them through when these opportunities come up and avoid that kind of risk in the future. And that's it. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we'll open it up to questions for anybody that has any.
I have one, Danielle, if that's okay, or Logan, if that's okay. This
Mhm.
is Don. This is Danilo.
Mhm.
I can't see anybody else. I didn't want to step on anybody's toes, so I can only see several folks. Um, um, yeah, and really, really, really good job. I thought that your use of the life. I had never heard of the life year approach before. It's very interesting that you would take that and apply it here. I think that's really well done. Just a question.
Mhm.
When you were talking about policy change, right? So it ends up being dependent variable, right? And I like that you standardize the independent variable in terms of life years. Um, how how would uh, what did you let's see how would you know a policy change if you saw it? I guess that's what it was. You know, what documents, laws or reports or whatever have you did you use to make that determination about whether or not policy changed?
So very simply, I took the policy documents, like, so I took their like records of what their flood or disaster policy was
Okay.
Before and after, and literally just did like a yes or no for if there was a difference, and then qualified that by looking at the scale. So if it was like a national scale or a regional scale or an international scale, then that kind of was an indicator there. And then when I only counted it if I could find that they were attributing that particular change to this event in something that they were like either introducing the policy or talking about it years later about like, oh, this was our change, we did it because of this. And that was the only time I included it, was if they specifically said we did this because of the 2013 floods, or something that we learned from the 2013 floods, or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Logan, nice job. This is Maria Ristigator, and I have a question about your chart where you have deaths display. And in Austria, it appeared to be a partial death. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering how that's counted. You've got 4.75 for Austria.
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I noted, because I used multiple sources from each country. I had to average them. So one report might say that they had 2 deaths, one of them might say that they had 8, one of them might say that they had something totally different. So I took an average of all the reports that I could find for each country. So that's why you have like 0.5 for Slovakia, because somewhere said that there were 0, somewhere said that there was 1. So I took an average there for everything, which makes it look a little weird in the fatalities column. It's the average across all the different reports.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, kind of alarming to me that the disaster damage reports are so different that they can be that they aren't sure how many people they lost is kind of scary, but that's what ended up happening with the different sources.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Logan, it's Robert here. Thank you very much for the presentation and for a great paper as well.
Mm-hmm.
A quick clarification. I know maybe you may not have answered this directly in the paper, or maybe you could consider it as a follow-up to this. Are you looking at any specific policy instruments that they use to compare? Is it insurance? Is it building codes? Is it, what specific kind of policy instruments were most evident across the countries?
You mean like what did the policy change actually include?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew I wouldn't have time to go into details, but I have another slide that kind of explains that a little bit more. So they're actually pretty different, and but most of them were not for Germany, because they already had their like compensation plan had just barely changed before the floods. But for the other countries, it was mostly like how to distribute compensation, or how to adjust their budgets, or how to look at like mitigation funds. for the next time versus their recovery fund. So a lot of them were about funding differences and their policy changes. But Germany was actually interesting because they had just like revamped their disaster policy after 2005 floods. And so they had like a pretty comprehensive plan going on. But I was kind of surprised to see that they still did have policy changes afterward from their lessons learned. They learned that they could use social media in their response, and they learned that they could have better management of their different personnel. And they ended up speeding up some of their other procedures that were like outlined in the plan from 10 years before, but hadn't actually been done yet. So they just kind of like sped up some of those. So yeah, but most of them were budgetary.
Okay.
Pravesh, I think you had maybe a question. I see it on the participants.
Hello, Logan. First of all, great presentation and great paper also. My question is about the life years indicator. So what are the issues? What are the issues with the life, like the disadvantage of using the life years indicators?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. One of the issues with the original life years indicator is that you have to have really detailed data for all of the different indicators. So like, let me go back and I'll show you a little bit. So I don't know if you can read it. It might be kind of blurry on the different screens. But for the original one developed by Dr. Noy, he had like extremely detailed data of every single victim of the disasters. And so he knew when he was doing mortality, he knew what the age was of every single person that died, and then was able to get like a very precise number of like, oh, this person died at 54 versus this person that died at 50, you know? And they were able to see that kind of difference in data. Obviously, I don't have the ability to get that detailed of information to be able to get a super precise measure. So I ended up averaging report numbers and then taking like kind of lessening the degree of detail by averaging the age of the citizens at the time of the disaster for my measure. So a lot of that is like needing a lot more data for the original. My adaptation is a lot more generalized. So I know that it's not going to be as precise as you would want from like the original measure. But I think with all of them being generalized in the same way, that it gives you like a comparison factor, but you wouldn't be able to use this as like precise, we, you know, lost this many hours very specifically, just because I don't have that kind of detailed data. And I feel like it's good enough for a comparison measure here, but you wouldn't be able to use it for much more. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
Logan, if I may, just Danilo here, just a question. The
Yeah.
picture on the slide that you had for supplementary information, the guy cutting his lawn,
Yeah.
and and it looks like there's 10 or 12 feet of water just to his left.
Yes.
Is that for real? I mean,
yeah, that's for real.
And so it is that structure that's saving his house and the rest of the people.
Yeah, so this is actually interesting. The reason I picked this picture is because for Austria, they had a very substantial flood in 2005 also. And this was actually one of their policy changes from before, was that they had in their disaster planning, they had established a whole organization where they were going to build these temporary levees to where commonly floods. And so they did that before the water got too high. And so that's what this is. They like built this before, and then it obviously held. And that's what I think. There's another picture.
Well, he better hope they aren't that temporary.
I know, right? Like, so this one too. So this one up here, you can see that like there's even like a boat in it, but then the road is down here, and like
Yeah,
this is a temporary levee. Yeah. So all of those are very, they're engineering marvels. I don't know if I would trust it that much. I would have evacuated before then, but whatever.
But they held, right?
Yeah, they were fine.
Wow. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't know if I would have stayed, but he was perfectly fine mowing his lawn.
Hope.
Yeah. A lot of trust in the engineers. I mean, I love engineers, but I would still be nervous.
Mhm.
Anything else? I did want to note one part that I thought was kind of funny. On the life years calculation, when he did economic damage, like the original indicator of economic damage, he took, like whatever they estimated what damage was, and then multiplied it by per capita income, but he only took 25% because he was indicating that we spend most of our time on non-work endeavors. And I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, obviously he doesn't spend a lot of time with academics because that wouldn't be a valid measure. But I took it anyway, so. Okay,
All right. Thank you, Logan. You did a wonderful job, and we
Thank
appreciate
you.
you coming today.
thanks.
All right. And so now we're going to move on to Zachary Cox. The show is yours.
Okay, there we go. You think I never used a computer before. All right, good afternoon, team. My name is Zach. In the original schedule, I went before Logan, and we're missing that feature. Logan, you knocked it out of the park. Just by way of a little bit of comments, a little bit of thanks. I know, Dr. Yannick, you mentioned that this is kind of the process of taking a paper from, or maybe like an introduction paper, one of your first publications, and taking it through to publication. And so I just wanted to thank Danielle and Robert. You made it a really easy process to take a class paper, to edit it, to go through the process and make it something that is now in the Biden School Journal. So thank you for that. The presentation I have today is beyond Kiefer Sutherland's designated survivor, an examination of the District of Columbia's recovery plan. And so what are we going to talk about? Well, first I'm going to talk about what the show is that I'm referencing, and then get into a little bit of the policy analysis. We're going to look at the National Disaster Recovery Framework and specifically the District of Columbia's recovery plan, talk about a few ways that it could be made better, and then wrap things up. So what is Designated Survivor? It's a television show. And it's essentially, I would show you the YouTube, but we all know how YouTube goes on Zoom and it's not great. But essentially there's a very very dramatic terrorist attack on Washington, D.C., and the federal government needs to respond and engage its business continuity measures and recover. It's of course a fictional narrative, but one of the things that it does really well is it creates the impression of efficacy, right? It makes you think, wow, people have really thought this through. People have really, if something bad were to happen, we would be able to deal with that. I was laughing. I looked at the comment section of that YouTube video, which is the trailer for the show, and everybody on there is a business continuity specialist, right? It seems really easy. It seems like something that you could do very quick. And so I asked, what would really happen? What would happen if there were to be a disaster, unfortunately, in Washington, D.C.? And I looked at both the National Disaster Recovery Framework and then the local version of that, which is FEMA's guide. So what is the National Disaster Recovery Framework? Well, essentially, it's a guideline of what the recovery management process should look like. So recovery is what happens. It's a foggy term, right? Nobody really knows when it starts or when it finishes. But it's supposed to happen after the floodwaters recede, or the fire gets put out, or we all leave our houses after a pandemic. It's essentially the rebuilding afterwards. And so this National Disaster Recovery Framework provides some support definitions. It talks about what a local plan would require in order to be successful. It talks about the different resources that are available to a local jurisdiction. That's in terms of money, that's in terms of, you know, in-kind resources, that kind of thing. With that said, it is often quite brief in detail. It doesn't, you know, it's a sometimes a PowerPoint presentation and gives a 1 or 2 sentence bit of detail. And so when I was going through and thinking about this project, it was really interesting because it again gives that impression of efficacy, right? It gives the impression of being really well thought out. But when you try to peer past the superficial, it gets difficult to do. So while the goal is to give a new recovery manager or a new emergency manager dropped into a disaster situation a fighting chance, it does try. It tries. And then the Washington, D.C. recovery plan builds on that. And it builds on that with the premise, under the premise that it's better to have quick action, right? Once you have a disaster, you want to recover quickly because certain options are only available at specific times, and you want to make sure that you engage them and use those opportunities. Because we had a word count for the journal, I really wanted to take a look at the economic opportunity and the economic and business recovery sections. For instance, where would you get the money? It suggests that the money comes from elsewhere, but that's not really made clear. It presents some goals for recovery managers. We can take a look on the next slide here. And like I said, it's a little bit of a PowerPoint situation, right? So it again looks really easy. Like we need to ensure sufficient and appropriate staff are available to provide services. Well, what does that mean in a context where you've had a disaster and you've had mass displacement? You know, in the disaster literature, we look a lot at displacement. Things like Hurricane Katrina come to mind when you've got an entire city of people who have evacuated. And so this doesn't really get at that, right? It looks like it does, right? It mentions these things, but there should probably be more considered if we wanted to move recovery planning away from the trendy term in disaster science is a fantasy document. We want to move them away from that and into something a little bit more impactful and effective. And so how could we move that into something that is a little bit more impactful and effective? Well, the first thing to do would be to understand that recovery in a jurisdiction like Washington, D.C. would be really large and really messy. There's, in the plan that Washington, D.C. has, there's 60 governmental departments, 29 non-governmental agencies or departments, 11 federal agencies, 8 regional organizations, and an uncountable number of private sector businesses. The thing gets into so much detail that they talk about the office of cable television, right? And it's really hard to manage the office of cable television and, you know, the White House, right? It's a lot going on, and documents like this aren't really prepared to handle all of that, even though the popular imagination, as shown by things like Designated Survivor, the TV show, and by plans like this, gives the impression that there is a lot of thinking going on, and that like. So if we wanted to improve it, we would use web-based tools. We would build it on blockchain, which was a really hot item in the world a couple years ago. It essentially makes your tracking a process or tracking an item impossible to forge. Also, you know, in disaster science, we're always talking about leveraging these tools in preparedness, right? Start recovery today. And that sounds a little bit silly, maybe to some people, right? If you haven't had a disaster, why are you going to start recovering for it? But that allows you to engage more people. It allows you to enhance the plan. It allows you to build up a recovery document alongside the preparedness materials, right? The dams and levees that Logan talked about that were so effective, and build everything up together. And then it also talks about building disaster preparedness into everyday life. So when I was looking at these documents, one of the interesting things that I found was they didn't have a very good understanding of the risks that they face, right? They were a little bit worried about flooding from the Potomac, but generally they made the mistake of thinking that they were well protected. They had a good geography and they were safe. I think if anything, COVID-19 has shown us that nowhere is safe, right? And you can have a once in a lifetime disaster, and it can be quite severe. And you need to prepare for that, right? Another thing that they showed, they talked about the document. It mentioned that Washington, D.C. is a possible site for terrorist activity, right? Again, back to the show, back to 9/11. But then they had done nothing to understand what that risk would look like in a recovery, right? They just kind of dropped the reader off. They said, this is a possible issue, and then stepped back. So just in sum here, I guess I'll take it back. I won't be in sum quite yet, even though that's what the title says. It's important that we don't be so hard or aren't so hard on a recovery plan like this. A lot of the literature in disaster science talks about how very little is known. The Disaster Research Center, I'm going to plug us for a second, is the oldest center for the social scientific study of disaster in the world at the University of Delaware. And the Disaster Science and Management program, with a master's and a PhD in this, does a good job of pumping out scholars who are able to understand these issues, who are able to ask the questions about recovery plans and take it the step further. But there's only a few of us, right? And so there's a lot of value in doing research in disaster science because it can have a real impact on people who might be affected by disaster. And then it is not only the president, although that might be the most symbolically important person in Washington, D.C., or their designated survivor who need to be kept in mind when planning for and recovering from disaster. A technically innovative approach is required to bring together all kinds of different stakeholders across the district and create an equitable recovery together. So with that, if anybody has any comments, questions, or concerns, please let me know.
Zach, if I may, it's Danilo here.
Hello.
I don't want anybody. As I was trying to follow what you were saying, is the plan then that they have for DC mystical or mythical?
Yeah. So
and if that's the case, how do you know against what criteria did you make those decisions?
So a little bit is based on the literature, right, of what a recovery plan should include, the academic literature. But a lot of it just came from looking at the document, which I unfortunately don't have in front of me, or I'd pull up an example. But essentially, it's a lot of one-liners. It's a lot of statements that sound comprehensive, but when you try to dig deeper and understand what they actually mean, they lead nowhere. There are things like, make sure you have adequate staffing for your office. Well, what does that really mean? And how do you get somebody to have adequate staffing in the preparedness phase and that kind of thing?
It would have been helpful if you would have made those criteria more clear. That's all. They may be there. I'm no question about it. I'm just saying, as a non-disaster person, I would like to see what the disaster looks like.
Absolutely, and that's feedback I get often. I spend so much time with my people that I forget that not everybody, and so my apologies on that.
Very well, not a problem.
All right, Danielle, if you want to take it on to the next speaker, that would be all right by me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your hard work. All right, Sashwat, I think you're next.
Hi, everybody. Just to give you a brief introduction, I'm Sarshut Roy. I'm a PhD candidate now in the Energy and Environmental Policy program at the Biden School of Public Policy. And this is my third year at UD. And I've been involved in research, mostly in energy policy, mostly concentrated on renewable energy innovation. And one of the things that I would like to present today is the role of battery storage in transmission, the transmission sector. So I'll just share my screen real quick. What we'll be talking about, I'll be talking about today is basically storage as a transmission asset. So previously, last summer, actually, I worked for a firm called ICF in Fairfax, Virginia. And I worked in their commercial energy team where they were developing and informing Department of Energy regarding policies on storage and how storage, battery storage in particular, can be used as a transmission asset. What I mean by transmission asset is basically a kind of complementary asset which could be used in place of spending a lot of capital on underground and overhead transmission lines. So as you know, the transmission sector in the United States is pretty old, to put it simply. And with more people coming in and more people having homes with higher energy demand, I think the transmission needs, the energy needs for the people are increasing. And with that, there needs to be a kind of increase in the transmission and distribution reliability as well. So what I proposed and what ICF proposed in their report was to kind of look at battery storage as a future innovation in terms of putting that in place of costly transmission and distribution upgrades in particular areas where the load growth, the electricity load growth is increasing. So just to give you a brief idea of energy storage. So energy storage, as you know, one of the components of energy storage is battery storage. And recently there has been a kind of a boom and a lot of talk has been done in terms of what battery storage services can be provided in our electricity system. And what this table shows is the various participation roles of battery storage and how and what services they can provide. So the services provided by the energy storage resource under FERC Order 841, energy arbitrage, which is basically buying at a low price and selling at a high price, frequency regulation, which kind of looks at how the demand and supply are matched in our energy system. So what we'll be concentrating more in this project is basically looking at transmission, battery storage as a transmission asset to replace overhead and underground transmission lines. Just to give you a brief idea of the policy activity in the United States, as you can see from this map, it's kind of all over the place. In the Midwest, you don't see a lot of policy or regulatory activity or regulatory and legislative action. So as you can see, the blue signifies regulatory action and the yellow signifies, blue signifies regulatory action and yellow signifies legislative action. And as you can see, New York, California, the Northwest has been kind of proponents of energy storage. Texas has seen a lot of regulatory action, but not a lot of legislative action. But there are wide varying legislative and regulatory actions across the United States. So different states are moving at their different speeds in terms of battery storage. And as we move forward and the battery storage prices decline, as we'll see in the research later, I think more states would be open to this technology. For the current state of installed capacity for battery storage in the United States, which is complemented by the regulatory and legislative action, California, as you can see, is the darker the color goes, it's more. So California, Texas, Illinois as well have had a large share of battery storage in their electricity generation mix as well. So last summer, I worked as an energy policy analyst intern at ICF, which is a consulting firm which consults the Department of Energy, Health and Human Services in various aspects, which include policy formulation, project consulting, market price analysis, and electric grid modeling. So I was a part of the transmission team, and I was involved in policy proceedings and projects in California, Texas, and the Southwest Power Pool, which included states like North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida as well. In terms of storage, looking at storage as a transmission and distribution asset. So when I was doing my research last summer, I was kind of told to look at the techno-economic aspect only, and the policy aspect would kind of come with that. But for my research paper here for the Biden School Policy, I looked at the policy and regulatory aspect as one of the most forefronts of energy storage and battery storage in particular, as we look at the deployment rates across the country. Just to give you a brief idea of what battery storage really entails, basically what we're talking about is, instead of constructing and spending a lot of taxpayer dollars on constructing huge overhead and underground transmission lines, which take a lot of time as well and cost a lot of money, there are particular cases across the country where you could use battery storage and defer these investments in substation and feeder upgrades. Technically speaking, the battery storage is typically placed on the test feeder, basically on the substation side, and this battery storage, which also has its own cost, but it can defer costs of up to like $1.5 to $2 million per mile of overhead and underground transmission line. So if just to give you a brief idea, one of the places where they've introduced this battery storage has been in Arizona, where they've used this kind of framework for deferring upgrade investments in the Arizona Public Service Territory in Tonto National Forest. So what happened was that the region in the Tonto National Forest had kind of a load growth, which would have been satisfied by capital upgrades in transmission sector, but Arizona Public Service instead kind of introduced this pilot project for looking at battery storage to satisfy those demands, instead of having to implement a multi-year project multi-year project with millions of dollars for overhead or underground transmission lines. So this project was launched in 2017 and involved a 2 megawatt, 8 megawatt hour battery. And the policies in Arizona didn't really support it, but Arizona Public Service went out of their way to kind of introduce this pilot project. And after this pilot project, I think a lot of other states have seen the benefits in terms of avoided cost of implementing overhead and underground transmission lines. So just to give you a brief idea of what it really means is that so transmission line has a capacity. So when the capacity cannot satisfy the demand in a region, you would need to upgrade the line. But instead of upgrading the line, if you have a battery storage at a substation that can provide the peak demand, you wouldn't really need to upgrade the line. So whenever the peak demand hits during the summer or the winter months, the battery storage can come in and kind of fulfill this peak demand during the summers or winters, where depending on the location of the place. So what my research motivation was basically to see why do we need battery storage for transmission services in the first place? How many years can a battery storage defer transmission distribution upgrade? And what are the benefit cost ratios of multiple configurations of battery storage? And going on from that, we discussed the opportunities and challenges for storage, and in terms of the current policy and regulatory framework, which is kind of in a flux right now with different states implementing different mandates, which we will discuss later. So why is the current system inadequate? There are four basic reasons. I won't go into much detail, but just to give you a brief overview. There's high peak average demand ratio, which basically means that the peak electricity demand is increasing, but the average demand is kind of remaining the same. This can create problems for transmission lines because the transmission lines have been kind of created to kind of fulfill a particular set of demands. But if the peak demand is rising, then you would need to construct more lines to fulfill that demand. So this kind of provides a business proposition for battery storage instead of constructing these lines. This was one of the maps that I developed in ICF, where we kind of mapped out the peak to average demand ratio in America. And you can see California, Montana as well which was surprising to me, has a high peak to average demand ratio. So even parts of Florida and New York. As I previously mentioned, aging transmission and distribution infrastructure, according to the DOE report that was published in 2015, 70% of transformers, 60% of circuit breakers, and 70% of transmission lines are over 25 years old. Some lines are obviously in good condition, but some lines, due to the usual wear and tear, especially the overhead lines, are in a pretty bad shape. So states across the country have kind of implemented plans to upgrade them, but if we can suggest a better option and save taxpayer dollars, I think that would be a good thing. Another thing which I've mentioned previously, a high transmission and distribution cost, but another thing which works in favor of battery storage is the declining cost. As you can see here, at the start of the decade, lithium-ion battery pack cost around $1,200 per kilowatt hour, but with increasing economies of scale and the growth of the electric vehicle industry, battery prices have kind of plummeted to around 200 or even lower than 200 in some markets in the world. So now is pretty much the perfect time to kind of look at, even if you're not implementing, but look at pilot projects like Arizona did, and see if lithium-ion batteries can provide a good alternative to transmission and distribution lines. Underground distribution feeder upgrade costs are around 700,000 to 1.5 million per mile in suburban areas, this according to DOE. And just to give you an idea of what this means is, if you have like a 10-mile transmission line, which is usually very common, you'll have around $10 to $15 million spent on the upgrade itself. So in terms of the benefit cost analysis, I use benefit cost analysis in the first place because most of the transmission and planning reports, which official reports, use the benefit cost ratio as a metric to kind of justify their investments. I looked at a 15-mile distribution feeder in Texas. The reason for using Texas was that I could get the data pretty easily from there. Other places had kind of barriers in terms of data access, but one of the places, this is in suburban Dallas region, this data was pretty easily accessible. So just to test out my benefit cost analysis, I took this case study, but this could be replicated to different regions as well. And what I did was kind of look at 3 different battery storage power and capacity configurations. So you have from 3 to 5 to 7. And another thing which was important was to kind of see these load growth scenarios. So different regions have different load growth rates. The load growth rates depend on how many people are moving into a city, how many industries are moving into a city. Is there any energy intensive industry, say oil drilling or data centers? Right now, they are pretty energy intensive industries which are moving into the city and kind of taking energy from the grid of that city. So I considered 1, 2, and 3%. 3% is a pretty high. It may not look that high, but in terms of electricity growth in a region, it's pretty high. So it was kind of looking at all these growth rate scenarios and seeing what kind of benefits we can get out of batteries. Another thing which I kind of considered after my consultation with my manager at ICF was kind of looking at not just the transmission, but if the battery can operate as a market asset as well. So apart from the peak demand periods, you don't really want your battery to kind of just stay there and do nothing. So kind of looking at how the battery can also provide market revenues apart from the transmission avoided costs. This is just a research flowchart which kind of looks at the technical aspects of the research and the economic aspects as well, wherein I used StorageWet, which is a software from EPRI, which was basically used to see how many years a battery can defer investments. And using that number of years, I kind of plugged that into the benefit cost analysis and plug the battery installed and variable costs and the traditional transmission distribution upgrade costs to get the benefit cost ratios for the different scenarios. I wouldn't go into detail with just to give you a practical overview of what it really means. This is the graph of the feeder in suburban Dallas. As you can see, that during some months, this is the blue line indicates the transmission capacity. So as you can see, right now in some hours across the year, the battery the load is kind of approaching the transmission capability. So even if we consider a 1% or 2% load growth rate, this transmission capacity would not be enough to kind of fulfill this demand. So I think this proved to be a really good data set, and I was kind of lucky to kind of find this and do my analysis on this data set. So the benefit cost ratio, just wanted to give you the formula for the benefit cost ratio, which I used. In terms of I used net present value analysis, and the first part was kind of technical aspect, which we had to kind of create a Python package to optimize the years of successful deferral. And based on this years of successful deferral, I created a model in MS Excel where you're using recent market data and looking at transmission and transmission plus market asset capabilities to see what kind of benefit cost ratios can a battery provide. This is kind of a snapshot of the model that I developed. You can see on the left, we have the parameters, and on the right, we have kind of a cash flow where we're kind of calculating the present value, and these are the benefit cost ratios across different deferral years signified on the top row of this cash flow analysis. And this is the benefit cost analysis table for different battery storage, power, and energy capacities. And as you can see, the benefit cost ratios are consistently over 1, which means benefits are greater than the cost. But in terms of having a very high battery storage with a high load growth, the benefit cost ratio dropped to less than 1. So this is for the transmission, just considering battery as a transmission asset, and this is considering battery as both transmission and market. As you can see, the battery, the benefit cost ratios are pretty much similar because of Texas's regulatory policies. But in general, if you see here, the market assets can provide increased benefit cost ratios, but there are caveats to that as well, which we'll cover later. But overall, you can see that battery storage can be a very beneficial investment for a utility or a service territory to kind of forego the capital investments of overhead and underground transmission lines. Just some insights. As I've mentioned before, there's a trade-off between capital costs and years of deferral. So the years of deferral is basically how many years you are kind of deferring the investment into those overhead and underground transmission lines. So we kind of assume, and it's kind of logical to say that we can't forego that investment like forever. So after a particular number of years, you definitely would need to construct those transmission lines, because that's logical. But in the long run, smaller battery storage can be profitable with higher benefit cost ratios. As you can see, the graph here, we kind of charted the deferral benefits in $1 million and the years of deferral. So in the long run, smaller battery storage can be profitable. That's because of the lower battery costs as well as the higher deferral benefits it provides. And looking at transmission plus market operation, it will cost more battery cycling, and thus costs related to battery replacements are also there. I'll just quickly go over the insights. I think I'm running out of time, if I'm not wrong. So the basic insights for the study were that battery storage for T&D deferral is highly locational, and depending on the location, it may be a correct choice or it may not be. And I think frameworks such as benefit cost analysis can provide a better scientific understanding of whether it's needed there or not. There's a trade-off between number of years of deferral and benefit cost ratio. And the one interesting conclusion of this research was that although large battery storage leads to a greater number of deferred years, it does not entail a higher benefit cost ratio, because in implementing a larger battery storage, you're also incurring a lot more capital costs. But larger battery storage is profitable in case of transmission plus market operation, because you're kind of compensating for the lack in the transmission side by kind of operating in the market, where you're buying energy at a low price and then storing it in the battery storage and selling it at a higher price. So opportunities for the future in terms of modularity, battery storage, as you know, is kind of, it can be transported from one place to another. So having utility purchase a battery storage, it can kind of implement that in one territory and then kind of move that once you see that the load growth rates are not increasing that much. You can kind of implement that somewhere else in your territory. Integration with PV is also PV or photovoltaics, which is solar energy, can also be done. And there's an investment tax credit under the federal guidelines, which give you a 30% tax benefit if you're integrating the battery storage with the PV. And value stacking optimization is nothing more than basically using the batteries for different purposes. So if you're using it for a transmission asset, you can also use it for a market asset. This kind of provides opportunities for even higher benefit cost ratios. In terms of challenges, there have been, even I think last week or last week, there have been news that battery storage can be a fire hazard. And it can cause thermal runoffs and lead to fires, electric fires. So that is one of the things that were highlighted, and the industry is currently working on different measures to kind of support battery safety regulations as well. And I think there will be federal guidelines coming soon as well. Apart from that, I think there's due to the new technology, there's an uncertain regulatory structure in most states. As I showed you in the graph, in the map, there are a lot of states which do not have battery energy storage systems even in their preferred resources and their planning purposes. So there have been a lot of talks on having a kind of a national policy in terms of battery storage, but that is kind of up in the air right now. So just to detail the policy and regulatory barriers and close out the presentation, energy storage for transmission and distribution can be a very beneficial asset, but due to its low utilization rate, utilities don't really kind of invest in battery storage, but kind of look at other aspects like load shedding, which means basically you're kind of cut off from power. So that is one of the things which utilities have used for treating these load growth peak periods. And this research addresses the kind of perception that there is in public policy and in across the world that batteries are expensive and they don't provide the benefit in term as opposed to their costs. So this research kind of addresses that and looks at how battery storage can be a transmission asset as well as kind of provide market benefits as well. So that is all. Thank you, Robert and Danielle, and yeah, take care. And if you have any questions, I'm here.
If no one else has a question, I'll jump in. This is Jonathan Justice. Thank you. That was a nice bit of analysis. I was just curious whether in your modeling, you had any way to take account of, because obviously, and it makes sense given sort of long-term trends, you modeled everything presuming that demand would grow fairly continuously, and so it was basically a buying time option. Did you model any scenarios where demand actually peaked before you got to the point where the battery's capacity would be exceeded? That is, conservation efforts or population growth slowed or stopped in that region?
Yeah, so we have, like when work in ICF, we have seen a few regions where, as you say, like apart from population growth, even the energy intensive industries, which come in suddenly to the area. And you have seen these places mostly in Washington area, where you see these Amazon data centers coming into a town, and they're kind of just shooting up the electricity demand for the area. And I haven't really replicated that in the model itself, but that is a thing which is being looked on pretty proactively in the industry right now, because I think data centers are here to stay, and probably with more cloud and other services which are being provided, I think energy demand will increase. And batteries being kind of a modular resource, I think it makes it easier instead of constructing these lines to kind of meet these kinds of demands. So a lot of companies are also using their own battery storage instead of relying on the utility. They're kind of using their own resources. So I think in terms of that, I think private investment would more kind of align towards that instead of government public resources. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions before I move on to Pravish? Okay.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me? Can I just get a thumbs up? Okay, right, good. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Pravesh Raghu, and I am a PhD student in energy and environmental policy. And I'm going to talk about the energy efficiency gap. And in this paper, I have did a review. I have looked at what is the energy efficiency gap, what are the solutions that are proposed, and what are the challenges that are associated with those solutions. So we know that right now we are faced with the problem of climate change. We are very well dependent on fossil fuels. We need to decrease our dependency on fossil fuel, and we need to come up with more solutions to combat climate change. And while investing in more renewable energy, developing renewable energy sources is one of the main mitigation effort against climate change. Another one is energy efficiency. So energy efficiency means that in very simple terms, just make a wider use of energy. Let's consume energy in a very optimal way. If we do that, then we decrease the energy that need to be produced, which means that we decrease the amount of fossil fuel, coal, natural gas, and oil that need to be burned to satisfy our demand. And energy efficiency practices can be applied anywhere where energy is used. At home, if you are purchasing an electrical appliance, then you might look for the one which is less, which consume less energy. You might alter your lifestyle. Instead of driving to campus, you can bike. Or at industries level, you can just look for those technologies that consume less energy, or like come up with a number of measures where you on an individual level you can reduce your energy consumption. Because eventually, if on an individual level we reduce our energy consumption, on a global level this will reduce the energy demand, and the demand for fossil fuel, the burning on fossil fuel to satisfy our demand will decrease. So this is a very effective tool. Energy efficiency is a very effective tool to combat climate change. A number of countries are pushing towards energy efficiency. We have the International Energy Agency who even said that energy efficiency is like the first fuel. If we look at the potential of saving energy and conserving energy, then this goes beyond the amount of fossil fuel that we can burn, right? So there is also, like we have seen cases like in Cuba, for instance, they have implemented some very very low cost initiative. For example, in Cuba, the government over there shifted the ban compact fluorescent light, and then they promoted more energy efficient lighting. And in a span of 1 or 2 years, we saw that the amount of electricity that was reduced just by shifting from incandescent light to more energy efficient lighting was huge. And this actually displaced the need for Cuba to build a new power plant. So eventually there is a lot of potential in energy efficiency, and many countries, they are pushing for a wiser use of energy. But the problem that we have seen over the years is that there is a gap from how we use energy to our optimal use of energy. There is this gap. Right now, we are not using energy optimally. We are using more than we need. So this is this gap that a number of economists and scientists, they have highlighted. They say that the way that we are using energy is not right. We are not making an optimal use of energy. We are consuming more than ever. So what I did in this paper is that I reviewed the literature for the last, this is a topic for the last 30 that has been discussed in the last 30 years. So I have reviewed the literature for the last 30 years. What I wanted to do was to characterize this gap, this energy efficiency gap. What are the barriers? Why is it so that we are not using energy optimally? So when I reviewed the literature, I came up with 4 main energy efficiency failures. Now these 4 main energy efficiency failures, these are what characterizes this gap. So I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to talk about some of the solutions that was proposed to address those failures, and what are those issues, those challenges that are associated with those solutions too. So let's get into the first failure. The first characteristic of this energy efficiency gap. Why is it so that we are not making a good optimal use of energy? So the first issues that I have seen is asymmetric information. So you see that energy is not something that we see. Like we cannot see electricity. It's not something that we see. So when we do not see how much energy we are consuming, then we tend to give it little priority. We do not have also we have like incomplete information on how much energy we are using, and this is one problem of energy efficiency. When you do not have much information about something, right? So there is a certain uncertainty that is installed. There is a degree of risk in it. So I have seen cases where in industries, for instance, they wanted to come up with new technologies that consume less electricity, and this is eventually going to enhance their process, and they will be able to save in electricity costs. But when they have approached some banks to get some loans and so on to invest in a more energy efficient technology, banks were like a bit skeptical because they do not know what is the potential of energy efficiency, and they could not characterize that, okay, this is the potential, this is the saving that we can get in monetary term if we decide to finance this technology. So this is one problem that I have seen, is that in society right now that we have people do not have a complete information about what energy efficiency is, about how much energy that we are consuming. So we tend to undervalue our energy consumption. And if I ask a question, how much electricity your toaster or your refrigerator or your car is using, I bet that many of you won't be able to answer me. And another thing that you can see around us, I'm pretty sure that in your house right now, you have a number of electrical appliances that are plugged in your socket. These electrical appliances, even though they are not using electricity, they are actually consuming a certain amount of electricity. Even though like the appliances are switched off, but they are actually consuming a certain amount of electricity. This is what we call ideal electricity. So they are actually consuming a certain amount of electricity, even though we do not know about it. So this is one consequence of incomplete information. We do not have that full complete information about how we consume electricity, how much our electrical appliances are consuming. So we just undervalue our electricity consumption. There was a study that was done a couple of years ago, and in the study they did a survey, and in the survey they asked questions like, where do you get electricity? From the survey, it was revealed that a number of people thought that electricity comes from the wall, not from power plants. So this problem of not having the information about how much you consume electricity or how much your car is consuming is a big problem. And this is an issue, this is a challenge when it comes to investing more in energy efficiency or buying more energy efficiency appliances. Another problem that we have seen is adverse selection. So the term adverse selection was coined by a Nobel Prize winner. His name is George Akerlof. So he looked at the idea when one person has more information that another one, then what is going to be the problem? So let's say that you want to buy a car and you want to buy a car that uses less gas. And the guy who's selling you this car, he has this information how much gas the car consumes, but he might just hide this information from you and leave you to buy a car that consumes a large amount of gas. So this is another problem too when we come to inadequate information that hinders that hinders investment in energy efficiency. Now, some of the solution that has been proposed is very simple: give people more information, awareness, and try to like do awareness sessions, come up with some ads, and try to give people the information about energy consumption and so on, and free of the solution that is very practical and has been implemented, has been tested in some states and in some countries, is product labeling. You might have seen energy efficiency product labeling when you buy and when you go to buy an electrical appliances, you will see that there is a sticker on the electrical appliances that say how much energy this appliance consume. Now this is a great initiative to inform people about when it comes to buying electrical appliances. But the problem is that when we look at studies about how people buy electrical appliances, the amount of energy that appliance consumes doesn't figure among the topmost priorities. It's always the cost, the brand, the cost and the brand. So things like product labeling on electrical appliances, we don't know how influential they are in influencing the decision of someone to purchase an electrical appliance. So the second solution is feedback on consumption. This was done in Sacramento, it was done in Puget Sound, in Washington, and in some other countries also, where the utility company prepare a sort of a one-page report, and every month when they issue electricity bill, they give that report to household. So household, they get a sort of a report that says how much they're consuming and how much they can save in their house. Now, this was also a very brilliant idea of getting people to know about how much they're consuming. But the problem is that after 12 months in Sacramento, for instance, people just get used of getting all those reports. So they get accustomed to those reports. So they ignore those reports. In Sacramento, we have seen that after 12 months, in the first 12-month electricity, those people, they start consuming less electricity because now that they know how much they're consuming. But after 12 months, everything becomes back to normal. Those reports that they get accustomed to those reports and they simply ignore that. In Puget Sound, Washington, where the same study was done, it was seen that after 7 months, electricity consumption again goes back to normal. People are not doing any effort in saving electricity. Now, the third solution that was proposed is to do energy audits. For example, in industries and in small and medium enterprises, so we have dedicated firms that can do energy audits for industries and small and medium enterprises. But the problem is that some firms, they have to look for those services, they have to invest in those services. It's not a free service. So this is kind of a disincentive, a discouragement, a disincentive for firms to look for another company and to pay another company to come and do an energy audit for us. If the firm is working very well, if they are doing profit, they are not, that there's like an additional barrier to go and look for a firm that is going to do an audit for us and to tell us how much electricity we can save. So these are some problems some solutions that I saw in the literature, and some of the issues that was highlighted where this gap is still existent. Now, the second issue, why is it so that this energy efficiency gap is still existent, is because of what we call split incentive, and this issue is very well related to the housing sector. Right, so the split incentive, so this is a small table that I have done to show the relation between the landlord and the tenant, but we are mostly concerned about case 2 and case 4 here. So let's say that I am going to rent my house. It's either me who has the responsibility to pay my utility bill, or the landlord has the responsibility. Now, in the case where the landlord pays the utility bill for me, so let me take the first case where I have to pay the utility bill. So right now we are renting places where we all pay for our utility bill. So the problem with us paying our utility bill is that we don't have much flexibility in deciding what are the electrical appliances in the house. So on the part of the landlord, he's simply going to invest, he's going to put all those electrical appliances in the house without considering energy efficiency, without considering the more energy efficient appliances. So I might have like a dryer or a washing machine or a refrigerator that consume a large amount of electricity, but I cannot do anything about it. I simply have to pay the electricity bill as it comes because I haven't invested in those appliances. The landlord decides, he puts all those electrical appliances over there. I simply have to use them and to pay the electricity bill. Now, this is the problem when it comes to tenant paying the electricity bill. They have to pay the electricity bill and they do not have much flexibility in choosing the electrical appliances. And on the part of the landlord, he is simply going to look at those electrical appliances that is the cheapest. right? Because he's not paying for the electricity bill. It doesn't matter what type of washing machine or what type of dryer you have in the house, as long as you have a dryer. So this is the way. Here we have this split incentive. The landlord has no incentive to invest in electrical appliances, and I am penalized here because I have to be at the cost. Now the second situation, that is case 4, if the landlord decides to pay the electricity bill, then I will not have any incentive to save on electricity because I am not paying the electricity. I can use electricity in whatever way that I want because I am not paying for it. The landlord is paying for it. And there has been a number of studies that was done to characterize this, to characterize the split incentive, to quantify the split incentive. So some of them are here. We have seen that in the case where the landlord pays for electricity, the tenant use more energy, and we turn down our thermostat less often. In California, there is a study that was done to see that, and they saw that tenants do not adjust the electricity when landlord pays for the electricity. We have seen in Canada too, in a study that was done by Majerol and Young. In Canada, people do not adjust the electricity when the house is when the house is unoccupied and the landlord pays for the electricity. And there is one study that was very recently done in 2018 by Melvin. Melvin, I think he was a student at the University of Delaware, and he did a study to characterize the split incentive. And he saw that when landlord pays for the energy for utilities, the tenant use 1.2% more electricity, 2.2% more propane, and 2.6% more fuel oil for heating purposes. So eventually here we have like a dilemma, we have like a paradox that has exacerbated this energy efficiency gap, especially in the household sector. So some of the solutions that was proposed is first a regulatory solution. That is, why don't we come up with a regulation and force people to build energy efficient houses? So this regulatory solution was, there are some people in Ireland that are testing this solution. So Ireland came up with a building energy rating. So everyone that is renting out their places, they need to have this rating, this building energy rating, that tells you how much electricity all those appliances consume over there, and what is the weatherization of the place and the heating and so on in those places. So this is one solution that was proposed in the literature, but this solution has a problem too. And this problem comes to this another market failure that I mentioned earlier, which is asymmetric information, adverse selection. Now, when a landlord says, when a landlord has this rating, he has more information about the energy consumption of the place. So he will tend to charge more to tenants to rent out this place. So this is one solution, which is to build a building code. It's not like a perfect solution, but still a solution that is like one step ahead to address this energy efficiency gap in the housing sector. Now, another one are concierge services. So concierge services, they are like companies who they are like energy expert. They come to your house and then they do like a sort of an audit, and then they tell you how you have to use, how much electricity and how much heating you have to use in your houses. But eventually, this depends on you whether you want to contact a company that offer concierge services and pay them in order to get those advice. Two issues here: there are political support to come up with regulations like the building energy rating, like some politician has to come up with this regulation, and another one is financial support that is needed. There's an investment that you have to do to know how much energy you are consuming and your saving potential. Now, the third market failure is externalities. So the way that externalities work is that you might have two electrical appliances that consume two electrical appliances, one that serve the same purpose, two washing machine, for instance. they are, one is more energy efficient than the other, but the one that is more energy efficient costs more than the one that is less energy efficient. And one of the reasons for that is because the one that is less energy efficient is not accounting for the damage that it is done to the environment and society. If we have a washing machine at our place that is less energy efficient, would this mean that we are using more energy to get our clothes washed, right? So this electricity that it is using and the damage than this electricity and the carbon dioxide that is produced from this use of electricity, this is not being internalized, it's not being accounted in the selling price of this washing machine. And maybe for a more energy efficient washing machine, there has been some additional technology in it. There has been some more refined processing, maybe just to produce this washing machine that consumes less electricity. So we have on the market black technology, that is an appliance that consumes a relatively more amount of energy compared to a green technology, which is an electrical appliance that consumes less electrical energy. Now the problem with this is that most of the time the black technology is cheaper, so people will tend to buy more of those black technology. And one of the way that we thought of addressing this problem is, let's tax black technology. All those companies who are producing technologies that are energy inefficient, that consume more energy that is required. So let's tax them. In economic terms, we call that internalizing this externality. Let's say that there is a washing machine costs an energy efficient washing machine that costs $100, and compared to this washing machine, we have an energy inefficient washing machine that costs like $80. Let's just do some sort, put a tax on that energy inefficient washing machine and increase the price to $100 so that people do not have to differentiate between prices. And one of the problems that we have seen is a rebound effect. Sometimes it might be that we are taxing a black technology so that people don't buy those technology, but it might be that it doesn't serve the purpose. We have seen that in some studies where you put a tax on some technology and we expect that the demand of this technology is going to decrease, but this doesn't happen. The demand of the technology still keeps on increasing. So this is what we call the rebound effect. We put a tax on a technology just so that we can account the high amount of energy that this technology is consuming and the environmental consequences of this technology, but eventually it doesn't serve to any big purpose. Now, the fourth type of market failure that contributes to this energy efficiency gap is something that we call behavioral anomalies. And this is related to our own behavior. It was seen, so one of those, so there's a number of behavioral anomalies. One of them is town discounting and present bias. The idea is very simple. If I tell you that I can give you $10,000 now, or $12,000 in a year, I bet that many of you are going to accept $10,000 now, because you don't know what is going, because even though you are going to get more money in a year, you don't know what is going to happen in a year. So the way that human behavior function in this context is that we are going to choose the benefit that we are going to get now over the added benefit that we are going to get in the future. So we as human beings, we are more present bias. And studies have shown that being present bias and less present bias has some implication in energy efficiency too. So when we are less present bias, that is, we are going to choose those $12,000 after a year, we have seen that those type of people, they tend to buy more energy efficient electrical appliances. So this is here I have mentioned 3 studies where it shows that when you're less present bias, that is, you tend to look for the future, then then those type of people, they are more likely to buy more energy efficient electrical appliances. So this is one problem that we have in the way that we behave. We tend to see the benefit that we have now over the added benefit that we are going to get in the future. And if I tell you that you need to choose between two washing machines, one of them consume more electricity for $100, and one of them for let's say $80, and one of them consume less electricity for $100, then you might say, okay, let's go for the $80 washing machine, because I mean, who knows what is going to happen after a year, and I don't know what is the added benefit that I'm going to get when I choose for a more energy efficient washing machine. The way that we are trained to look at it is like, let's look at the benefit that we get now, and the benefit that I get now is that I get to save $20 on a washing machine. So we choose the more energy efficient washing machine, and we tend to be more present bias than so this means that we have a very high time discounting. Now, another behavioral anomalies that I have seen is a positive illusion. We do have some people who believe that the future is going to be better. So it is going to fix itself. So when you buy a washing machine, you just think of, that's fine, climate change, we are going to find a solution. So I don't need to go and invest in more energy efficient appliances, which is more expensive. So we do have this problem too in the literature that I have seen that mention this is the problem with energy efficiency. Now, some of the solution is again access to information. People they are not aware that how much they consume, so they simply do whatever that they want. And the second proposed solution is that we need a behavioral change. We need to change our behavior. We need to see how much electricity that we are consuming. Somehow we need to alter our lifestyle. As I said earlier, instead of, if you can bike to the campus, why just driving over there? So maybe those small behavioral change eventually is going to aggregate, is going to add up to something big. Then this is what many people, they are focusing. Let's try to change our behavior when it comes to consuming goods and services, because any small change that we are going to do in our lifestyle, this is going to decrease our energy consumption. This is going to decrease the amount of electricity that we consume, decrease the amount of carbon dioxide that is produced. Even though if today you decide to just unplug your electrical appliances from the socket, and this is going to be like a big impact that you are going to do on an individual basis on carbon dioxide reduction, right? But again, the problem here is this massive behavioral change that is required is something that is very difficult to achieve. We didn't have to go far away. Just look at in the last couple of days with the COVID, with the virus. We tell people stay at home, but there are so many people that cannot stay at home, right? The situation with the COVID virus is a bit similar here, because we need everyone to cooperate and to stay at home, but this is very difficult to do. And in terms of changing behavioral change, also we need everyone to change our behavior when it comes to energy consumption, so that we can create this massive impact. But this is something that is very difficult to do. So in this study, I wanted to characterize this energy efficiency gap. Why is it so that we can save a lot of energy, but we are not? And I really wanted to look at the problems, look at the solutions, and look at what has been proposed as the solutions to the problem. So from here, now we have a very comprehensive idea of what the problems are and what are the solutions that are tried and tested, and how we can refine those solutions in order to address this problem of energy efficiency gap. So this is all that I have today. I am from Mauritius, by the way, which is a very small island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And this is the capital city, a picture of the capital city of Mauritius. Right. And if you have any question, I'll be very happy to answer your question.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, first of all, I really liked your presentation. I thought it was interesting. This kind of ties into my research interests as well. So I know you were talking about taxation, like taxing certain types of
Kara? Can everyone hear me? Is this a problem with my computer?
No. It's for Kara, I think.
Arrow froze, I think.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There she
Yes,
is.
I can, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So I was just talking about how you were talking about tax incentives for like taxing Black technologies and maybe subsidizing green technologies. Do you think another issue that could potentially be added to that list is sort of the careful balance between, you know, taxing things that we don't want people to invest in as much, but also that slippery slope of being a regressive tax? So in other words, you know, when it comes to people who are upper middle income or like upper income brackets, they tend to already have energy efficient technology. You know, they have the fancy refrigerators, the green washing machines, but for lower income families, that's not as much of an option, and they tend to not have as much control over their appliances since they tend to rent more anyway. So when it comes to those taxes, even when they do have to pick between this machine or that machine, they're usually going to opt for the cheaper option, and they're going to carry that tax burden. Have you ever thought maybe of a way to get around that, or has any of your studies mentioned that?
I have come across studies that mention about the burden on income groups, like high income groups. They can buy more energy efficient appliances even though it is more expensive, and low income group, they eventually they will tend to buy more, they will tend to buy the Black technology because of the price. If this technology is lower in price, then they are going to go for those technology. I don't know how, by coming up with a tax on a Black technology, and how, you know, how this is going to affect income group. Like, so I haven't come up with a study that I haven't come across any study that says the impact of putting a rebate on energy efficient technology and putting a tax on Black technology, and what is going to, and how do income groups respond to this situation. I don't know how this is going to play out in real life, but I know that right now what some cities they are doing, they are not actually going for the tax, they are going for auditing, like concierge services that I have just mentioned. I think that even in Delaware we have a program here, the Delaware Weatherization Assistant Program, something like that, where the city, they look for low middle class, so they look for the lower middle income population. They approach them, and then they do like a sort of an energy audit of their house, and then they tell them what is the saving potential of their house, where they can save in electricity, where they can save in how much they can save by such small actions, and how this is going to reflect in their electricity bill. So I don't know much about the tax. Is more of an, you know, like macroeconomical policy, right? So I don't know how this is going to play out in more of an regional level, or for just an income in a particular income group. But I know that some cities, and not only in the US but in some countries, they are more developing concierge services so that they approach low income families, and then they tell them, do this, do that, and this is how your bill is going to be reduced. So yeah, I just hope that I answered your question. Thank you.
Hi, Pravesh.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? I have a question, well, more of a lot of comments, because that was awesome and well done. So I think I'm going to touch on like the human behavior aspect of it because of a course that I'm currently taking. And I think there's a huge difference when people hear saving energy versus saving money, because a lot of people don't understand what energy means and what that means to them. So as a consumer, energy means something to me like an energy bill. But also as a policy person, energy means, and an environmentalist, energy means I'm depleting a resource. Like that's a resource. And I understand it on a, different scopes as well. Somebody who owns an apartment building as the landlord versus the tenant, like we all understand it differently. So saving money, people speak money. I mean, that's a common language. And I definitely think that we can use that. While you were talking, I actually went on to see if I had received my April Delmarva bill, and I was on there and I was looking for to see where they put the tips, like where to save and how to save the money. And first of all, they're pretty buried. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily, I don't know if that's just a flaw of the design, if Delmarva doesn't want them accessed, but when you read through them, they're also very vague. So it says like unplug your electronics. People think electronics could mean like my computer, my phone, my, those things. I every morning unplug my coffee machine when I'm done with it. I make toast. I unplug the toaster and put that away. I wrap the cord around it actually to prevent myself from eating more toast. But long story short, I unplug my devices. I've been home now for 2 months, and my energy bill is the lowest it's been in a long time. I use natural light during the day and a few lamps here and there, but that's a story and a narrative to tell people that I saved money sitting at home for the last 2 months just from that, versus saying unplug your electric devices. People don't translate that to what that means for them based on their understanding of the language of saving money versus saving energy. And also with the audit you were mentioning, people have to want the energy audit. So like if someone pays an expert to tell them what they're doing wrong, they're more likely to take their advice because they paid for it and they feel like, I don't want to waste the money. I just paid for somebody to tell me how to lose weight or how to save, But if it's free advice, such as on my Delmarva site, the problem becomes, I think, the access to the information, like you said, the language used, and then also the incentive. People understand monetary incentives more than anything. If you see you're going to get a free tote bag or a $10 gift certificate, you're going to want the $10 gift certificate, depending on where it's to. And I just think that we can offer, like, for your Black technology aspect, like, offer a recycling program. So people, instead of maybe, or in addition to any form of tax type thing, if you have these old appliances, the problem is people throw away what they think is broken. We use so much energy just to build those appliances, but not only that, every component of those appliances can be reused and recycled in some way, shape, or form. And I hate to say it because I've been thinking of this, like there's got to be better ways to incentivize people to do these things, and then also describe it in form of a narrative of like, this is the impact not only you can make on your own wallet, your own lifestyle, but hey, we could live a lot longer on this planet if we just, figure things out. Yeah. Sorry, I don't want to take up any more time. I actually really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you very much. Just to add up to the first point that you said about the feedback that you receive on your utilities bill. So when it all started, when they come up with this idea, okay, let's give people feedback on their electricity consumption, the way that those feedback was framed is more on how much electricity you can save. But very recently, in the last couple of years, I have seen that there are some studies that emerge and say, no, this is not the right approach. So those studies has focused on the content. the information that is being sent out. Let's not try to include all those things about how much unit, how much kilowatt hours you're consuming, but let's convert everything in terms of monetary value. So now, I don't know whether this is already in practice. I don't know that whether there are some cities who are doing that, but we have some study that says this whole feedback thing, let's change it and let's put it in terms of monetary terms. Tell people how much money that they can save over how much electricity that they can save. So this is something that is quite new. I don't have much information about it. I know that it has been proposed in some academic journals, but yes, eventually you rightly caught up this idea that the idea between price and electricity cost and electricity consumption, where the layman is going to focus his attention. So this is something that is new, that is emerging, and hopefully in the future we will see that we get feedback that tell us how much money that we can save, and about how much electricity we can save, or how much carbon dioxide we can reduce. Yes. So these are my comments on what you just said. Any other questions?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Hi, this is Cynthia Brown. Hi, I just want to say thank you to everybody. I need to get off for another meeting, but yours was hit home personally. I could actually talk to you about this one because I think, as a consumer, I paid my bill for many decades as a homeowner. And so I think one thing that hit home, I was of a generation, we didn't think about this much. You bought an appliance, you used it for years, Well, I had to buy a new washer and dryer when I moved to Newark 4 years ago. And it was a very big deal, like, oh my gosh, things had changed so much. And so I really had to weigh the agitator without the middle part or versus the big drum, and it was more energy. And I went back and forth and read all this stuff, and it was a lot to take in. But in the end, I went for the newer version, which was really hard for me because I was so used to the other type. But it was all about telling me I was going to use a lot less water. And that meant a lot to me, for the, world and for myself, for my bill. So in the end, I feel really good about that. I have a dryer that tells you when it's dry, doesn't keep running forever. So anyway, but I didn't spend $1 million on them. So I think there's sometimes a fallacy that you have to spend a ton of money on the higher end stuff. I'm a middle, what do I call myself? I'm a middle income population. So I don't have tons of money to spend on things, but I want to be careful of my bill. So I think that's, it was a great presentation. It really, like I said, it really hit home. And I think that's fascinating about, I always think that if you run a place for the shore, for a week at the shore, you can leave the air running the whole week and never think of, some people do because they just don't care because it's not on your bill, so I think that's all, but I'm not like that. I'm very conscientious. I'm very conscious of my bills. My youngest just left home, so I'm curious to see how my water bill will drop this month, so on showers and washing. Anyway, but thank you. It was really great, and I appreciate all of you, and for Danielle and Robert and everybody, it was excellent. Thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this. So thank you, and good luck to you all, and I'll talk to you. All right, take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. Daniel, do you have anything else to add? Because I noticed that we are 6 minutes past. So if
I'm all set, and we're kind of losing people here and there, so I would say all yours. Thank you, guys.
All right. So just to thank everybody that you've all done a phenomenal job. I want to thank, first of all, our faculty board for your mentor and in-kind support to this far. And then I wish to also thank our editors who worked day and night to make sure that, we get the best products to market. And then, of course, the authors who actually did the heavy lifting of getting us the product. So thank you all. Thank you very much. Round of applause, everybody. Yeah. In addition to that, I just wanted to give you maybe in the next 3 to 5 minutes max, I just wanted to say that, we started out with 10 papers that came through the door, and then these went through different rigorous assessments. And at the end of the process, we ended up with five papers that everybody could agree upon that were good enough to make it to the journal. These 5 papers, 4 of which have been presented today. One of the authors, unfortunately, has a class which is happening at this time, but she also wrote a phenomenal paper. It's on gerrymandering, and it's very timely, especially this being an election year. So thank you all to all the authors. And also just to give you a quick overview of what happens next. So you've heard from the authors, so I'll just share my screen here. You've heard from the authors, and right now we are going into the next phase of the writing process. So we have copy edited all the articles that so far have been produced. And then what we've done as well is we have sent, the final piece of work to a professional copy editor to review everything from, page A to page Z. So that work has been accomplished. And right now we are into the design phase. So here is to just show you how the final product will look like. So this will be the cover, both the front and the back cover of our journal. And then the next step after this is we are going to go to a designer. So the designer is going to lay out each piece of the article as, a formal sort of journal article as it should be laid. And then once that process is done, we will go to proofreading. So once the journal is laid out and everything is in place, I will go to proofreading as the final stage of the review process, and then we'll have the journal accomplished. Now, we were hoping that all this could be done ahead of this symposium, but the lockdown and all that, and the back and forth, it was impossible to accomplish this. So instead of choosing speed, we chose to go for quality. So we've decided to delay the actual publication to later to ensure that we have the best quality of the journal possible, as opposed to a speedy work that may not necessarily meet the standards. So that's it, everybody. We are hoping, fingers crossed, that by the 15th of this month, of next month, everything will be ready. And just for your information as well, that this is going to be the first fully digital journal. So each of the papers will be published independently on our website, but also the complete book will also be available. And then of course, this recording will also be online. We actually didn't foresee COVID-19, but I think our strategy has not been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I also like to see the fact that a lot of articles, especially those on disaster, relate to especially the time in which we find ourselves in as much as they were written in a different time. So I'd like to stop here for now and open the floor for any questions or comments or advice. And then finally, for those of you who are either authors or on the board, we are open for new leaders. So please step up if you feel like you could be executive director, editor-in-chief. All these are fantastic opportunities for you to grow career-wise, but also to contribute to an important piece of work with respect to the Biden School. So thank you all, but also if you have any comments or ideas, please, we're open to listening before we close it up.
Thank you to you all. Robert and Danielle, you did a wonderful job with all this and all the authors. It was good to hear you all. Good to see everybody, at least if it's this way. Except Jonathan. I always have to do that.
And who asked you anyway?
For sure. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel.
As
Bye-bye.
much as I hate to do it, I'm going to echo Donald. Great job. You've just done a terrific job the whole way through, and this was a great event. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Even
All
if
right.
not
We will still be open on email. So if you have additional comments to make, you can always reach out to me and Danielle, and we'll be able to take care of it. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good day. Stay safe. Stay safe. Most important.
Thanks, everyone. Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. All right.